No, I'd say that I disagree with you guys that he'll slip past 4th overall. I think the only world where he doesn't get taken here is if for some reason this pick is traded away from San Jose.
You're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams.
That's a big one.
Yeah!
Good evening and welcome to episode 175 of the Boys in the Booth podcast. Cody, Abrams, and Melbourne with you for this one. As you can see, Chad and I are together here at my place, and Casey is at his place in Kingston. All three of us are going to be together this coming weekend for the Boys in the Booth Ball Hockey Classic, formerly known as the Pepsi Cup. Can't wait for that. You guys were together last weekend in a golf tournament. How we doing, boys?
Man, between the golf tournament and the whole trip this past weekend and then traveling for work these last 2 days, I am so behind on sleep. I'm so exhausted. So I've got to figure it out the next couple days before the Boys in the Booth Classic this weekend because, man, I've just been a zombie walking around.
Yeah, you better figure it out, Case. You're going to be our leading scorer, so you gotta get some rest. Dude, I feel the same way. Harper asked me if I wanted a beer when I got here, and I said no. Like, I drank a lot on the weekend. Like, I just need this week to rest, relax, and recover. And that's what I've been doing, at least on Monday and Tuesday, as we get set for the Boys in the Booth Classic. But yeah, other than that, things are good. I'm home for the week, working from home. It's nice to see the family and the new baby. I'm now an uncle of a second nephew.
Congrats.
Which is great. So I went and saw the new baby, Merrick, and he is 2 days old now. So that is just so much fun for me being an uncle, and probably less fun for the parents who have to stay up all night long for the next 6 months. But yeah, doing well, and glad to be home and in Mallory Town with you.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine being Cam and Brooke. That is a whole other level of sleep deprivation when you have two little ones. So feel for them, but congrats to them. Congrats to you and the rest of the fam on that. Doing great, boys. Looking forward to this coming weekend. Obviously, had a great last weekend there. And we are burning the midnight oil for this episode. It's our annual draft preview show. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be Wednesday, and that'll be exactly 1 week from the start of the 2023 NHL entry draft. Round 1 gets going next Wednesday, starting at 7 o'clock on Sportsnet and the NHL Network. So looking forward to all of that, and we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to do a snake draft, so we'll determine that in a matter of moments here, and then we're just going to make picks. We're going to go through the draft order, the top 15, and we're going to make our selections, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's determine who's going to pick where to start.
Yeah, and just to clarify too, we're going to make our picks based on team fit and who we think the team will actually pick, because obviously different GMs have different drafting strategies, and we're going to do our best to make our best shot at a prediction here of what's going to happen on draft day. So just wanted to clarify that as well. And I've got a number generator in front of me, Casey, if you're wondering about order here. And we'll call you number 1, Harper number 2, and me number 3. I'm going to generate a number, and whoever it comes up on gets first pick. Then I'll do it again, and they get second. So Casey 1, Harper 2, me 3.
Sounds good.
So we got number 2. That means Harper goes first. Okay, Casey, just you and I. And we got number 3. So I go second, Casey goes third, and then we do a snake order. And like you said, we're going to do the top 15 picks. So it's going to be a good time. So Harper, with the first pick, who could you possibly be taking?
Well, I feel like Kyle Davidson right now of the Chicago Blackhawks. I'm honored to win the first pick here. So, I mean, it's Connor Bedard. It's the that's a given. What more is there to say about this young man? The way he moves laterally is like no one else. The shot is incredible. His speed, his skill, his agility, all of it. The guy looked absolutely jacked at the combine, by the way. character. This kid has it all, and someone should start a stopwatch of how long it takes the Blackhawks to make this selection, because they could make it in 30 seconds. I swear to God, it'll be no brain power required at all to go up and make this pick. So Connor Bedard of the Chicago Blackhawks, we're going to see it on next Wednesday.
Gary Bettman's going to be announcing who's coming up for the draft for the first pick, and you're just going to hear from the table, "Connor Bedard!" They're just going to yell it. You're just from the back of the room, like, well, why are you calling us up?
Yeah, exactly. The only thing I have to say about Bedard is, who do you think his closest comparable is currently in the NHL? I was reading Corey Pronman's draft rankings from The Athletic. He does a comparable for some of the top prospects in the draft based on size, play style, even country of origin as well sometimes. A lot of factors go into it, but his closest comparable to Connor Bedard was David Pastrnak. I thought that was a bit interesting. It makes a lot of sense. High-end skill, great shooter. Scored 60 goals last year, 100 points. Like, that's the kind of guy we're expecting Connor Bedard to be. But do you guys have any other names out there that you think is comparable to Connor Bedard?
Not necessarily with on-the-ice play, but the way he looks, like his body. Sidney Crosby, for me. The way he looks, he's got the big legs. He's not tall, but he's wide and thick to me, like Crosby. So,
I mean, a lot of people have made kind of similar comparisons of Patrick Kane in that he's built rather similar to him and had to change the way he shoots because of an injury, and that's yada, yada, yada. But honestly, I don't think that I'm going to make a comparable for Connor Bedard, because I think he's a pretty unique player with that. His size has still allowed him to be a sniper and a goal scorer at center, which I don't think we've really seen a lot of that in the last 15 years. A kind of, in size, maybe undersized center being the sniper generational talent. So, his shot's like a Matthews, if you want to throw that in there, but I don't know. I don't think there's a comparable for him, and I like it that way because I think that he could be the guy.
That's a good answer, Case. That's sort of how I felt when I was trying to think of a comparable. So I was just curious what you guys thought. But if we're done with Bedard, I'll move on to number 2 here. And
yeah, go ahead.
This is where it gets a bit hairy, I think, but not really, because I think we're all kind of guessing that Adam Fantilli is going to go to the Anaheim Ducks. That's who I'm picking to go to the Ducks, but I said it could get a little hairy because there are some good candidates in this tier. I essentially broke down the first round into tiers based on some of the lists I've seen and articles I've read. And in the first tier, I have Connor Bedard alone. He's the franchise player. He's going to be better than everybody else in this draft, and he could be a potential, best player in the NHL in a couple of years. Like, this kid is special, right?
Absolutely.
But in that next tier down, that's where I have a few players. I have Matvei Michkov, I have Adam Fantilli, and Leo Carlsson. And I actually have them in that order too, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's where I think they're going to get picked. Mm-hmm. But in that second tier, I categorize those players as players I could see being an NHL all-star, like absolute elite player, but not quite best in the league. So
yeah. All
that being said, Adam Fantilli to the Ducks as one of the best players in this draft. And what is there not to like about Adam Fantilli? He's a guy who plays with size. He plays with some grit. He's tough to play against for, a guy who's able to put up points. Hobey Baker winner, led his team in points. Did he also lead the NCAA in points? Was that something that he did too? Led the NCAA among draft eligible players. So all of this, like an incredible season. Adam Fantilli, second overall. I don't think it's a question.
He's everything you want in a first line center, and this is going to build a sweet 1-2 punch with him and McTavish, two guys that are hard to play against with great compete and two-way capabilities. So I think Fantilli is definitely the pick here, and I feel fine saying that in the first and second picks that you guys are right. I'm not going to say that for the rest of the draft.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said on Fantilli. Play driver, he's fast, physical, can also play on the wing as well. You know, in Anaheim, you've got Zegras and McTavish already as the 1-2 down the middle. So if you wanted to start Fantilli on the wing, you could. But look, like, you can never have too many centers. And I do think that he is just a bit above Leo Carlsson. Like, the stuff that he did as a freshman this year at the University of Michigan was just out of this world. So absolutely, Fantilli, number 2 to Anaheim.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and pick the third pick here, and happy to have the snake draft, the third pick, to make this easier on me. I'm going to go for the Columbus Blue Jackets in Leo Carlsson. I kind of had the players broken into similar tiers at the beginning. And the second tier that you mentioned, Chad, I actually had them as guys that would go first overall last year. And I think Leo Carlsson is definitely one of those guys. And the Columbus Blue Jackets are in a position where they're kind of finishing up the rebuild and looking to make a playoff push. And you've seen that in the guys they've picked up recently in trades and free agency last year. So they're looking for a guy who can make an impact to this team right now, and that is Leo Carlsson. Matvei Michkov may be the higher talent here, but again, he's not going to be available for at least 2 years. So Columbus is going to take the guy that they can get in the lineup right away, just like they did with Sillinger, and how quick they got Kent Johnson in there. And Leo Carlsson, he's got size and IQ. He plays the game the right way. We saw this in Sweden, both at the SHL and with the World Juniors. He was a phenomenal player for them in the World Juniors, and I think he's going to be the center for them in the future that can kind of allow Kent Johnson to be pushed to the left wing and play with a little more freedom, whereas Leo Carlsson can kind of play all over the ice.
Yeah, and Leo Carlsson, like, what an incredible player we're expecting him to be anyways. And from what we've already seen, he definitely already is. You mentioned size, Case, 6'3" frame, a guy who is, you know, by all accounts, a bit below average in terms of foot speed and skating overall, but makes up for that 100% in terms of his compete is one, and also puck skills and shooting. Like, this player is dynamic offensively and isn't afraid to go to the dirty areas. So to me, like, when I think about a player that we just described in Leo Carlsson, I think he's similar to a guy like John Tavares. And maybe that's just because he's fresh in my mind because he's a Maple Leaf, but a guy who's not afraid to go to the dirty areas, doesn't have that foot speed, but is really smart and can make great plays. So if he can be anything close to what John Tavares is, that would be a hell of a pick at number 3. Because like you mentioned, Case, I think he also could have went first overall last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Carlsson, a great player, had a really strong world championships in the summer. Fantilli was in that tournament as well. And there was some conversation about, you know, could the draft really start at number 2 instead of 3? So either of these guys could go number 2, but I do think that that Carlsson goes third to Columbus. He's a great fit there. Natural center, extends plays, and is very hard to defend. This is a great pick for the Columbus Blue Jackets if it indeed is Leo Carlsson at 3.
And final thing to add too, before Case chimes in with his 4th overall pick here, isn't it great being Columbus in the 3rd spot? You don't have to make the decision. You know, like, you just get a great player to fall right in your lap, and you don't have to make any tough choices. So
definitely.
Well, we said that about Arizona last year, and then they went ahead and passed on Shane Wright. So
that is true. Crazy things do happen.
Yeah. All right, Case, back to you with the 4th pick.
So a team that's in the exact opposite position as the Columbus Blue Jackets, now entering the rebuild. We kind of saw it finally last year, for the first taste of the rebuild, where they started trading players away for picks. So San Jose, with the 4th overall pick, will take the arguably second best player in the draft, Matvei Michkov, because they can wait on this guy. They can hold on to this. They can start the rebuild, and now 2-3 years down the line, I guess it's 3 years for him. He'll have his entry-level contract starting. Maybe they'll have some other young pieces ready at that time. So I think it'll be perfect timing for the San Jose Sharks. This guy is absolutely ridiculous, putting up some unreal numbers in both the MHL and the KHL that are kind of rivaling Ovi's numbers. Like in draft year and draft year -1 in the MHL, he had better numbers than Ovi and almost a goal per game. So he's been a lot of fun to watch in the KHL whenever you see clips get posted, because how else are you watching the KHL in North America? But I definitely have this guy as right up there with Fantilli for second best in the draft, second most talented, and maybe, it's definitely the second highest upside in my eyes. So fourth overall, San Jose is going to be laughing in 3 to 4 years' time.
Yeah, and with San Jose too, something I wanted to mention as well is they also have another pick in the first round. They have number 4 and number 26. Although number 26, you're not particularly excited about it to start your rebuild, it's worth noting that you have 2. So you're able to take this risk on Michkov and then go get someone else who's also, maybe more of a sure thing at 26. If there are any sure things at 26. Point is, a guy who doesn't have as high of a ceiling, but maybe has a frame where you're confident he'll play in the NHL and be able to make some sort of impact in a few years. So something to look out for too. Few teams have 2 picks in this upcoming draft, and we're going to get to another one or another few here coming up. But yeah, San Jose case, I love the pick. It makes total sense to me. Michkov, such a great player, smashing records over in Russia. Nikita Kucherov, similar type player going into his draft year. He fell all the way to the second round for similar reasons. I believe he also had a contract, and he was a player who was a bit undersized but could score, and also looked like he didn't give a shit when he played in the MHL, which is, by all accounts, what scouts are saying about Michkov. So I do think it's a perfect pick for San Jose. And that being said, I don't know if he goes this early, to be honest. Harp, what are your thoughts on Michkov?
Yeah, I had Will Smith going to San Jose 4th overall personally, but I like where your mind's at, Case, with Michkov. And look, wherever he gets picked, it's gonna be the first gasp of the first round of the draft. But there's no doubting his unbelievable talent. He can score at will, and it would make a lot of sense for San Jose to pick him up, and they can go and buy some players and try to get competitive earlier than expected. There's certainly a desire for that. They don't want this rebuild to take forever, and then when he gets there, finally they're in a good spot. So I had Will Smith, but I could see Michkov.
I think if
at
any other team
as well. We'll have to see. Crazier things have happened.
Case, do you see any world where Michkov drops past number 4? And now, a word from our sponsors. This podcast is sponsored by Liquid IV. Whether you're staying active or nursing a hangover, Liquid IV has you covered. Just one stick of Liquid IV in 16 ounces of water hydrates faster and more efficiently than water alone. It contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C, with 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. It's made with premium ingredients, it's non-GMO, and it's free from gluten, dairy, and soy. There are plenty of awesome flavors, but my personal favorite right now is lemon lime. So get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code boys_in_the_booth at checkout. That's 20% off anything in the store when you order using the promo code boys_in_the_booth at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today with Liquid IV. This podcast is also sponsored by the best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. Plus, Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first ticket purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code Boys in the Booth in all caps. So click the link in the description down below to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code Boys in the Booth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
No, I'd say that I disagree with you guys that he'll slip past 4th overall. I think the only world where he doesn't get taken here is if for some reason this pick is traded away from San Jose. I just think that San Jose being the team in this position at this part in the draft, it just makes total sense for them to take him and have him as it's not even a project because you know he's going to be good. It's just a timeline that kind of lines up better with San Jose than any other team in this draft other than maybe Washington.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was just wondering because obviously there's a ton of talk about Michkov slipping, and we didn't think Shane Wright was going to slip from 1 to 4 last year, and things happened. So yeah, just a question. But if we're done on Michkov and San Jose, I will move on to Montreal with the 5th pick in the draft. And this one, I think also we can be close to certain. I think after this pick, it opens wide up. But I think at this pick right now at number 5, Montreal will take Will Smith of the United States Development Program. A 5'11", 6-foot centerman. He's the number 1 centerman on that team. According to Corey Proman, he has average skating and compete, but high-end puck skills and above-average hockey sense and shot. And he's very crafty as well. He's one of these players who is just uber talented offensively, and obviously that's why he's the number 1 center on that incredible team who, by the way, like every year is just churning out top-line players in the NHL, and they've been doing that for the past 5 years at this point. So yeah, I think Will Smith at number 5. Unfortunately, he doesn't go to Philadelphia at 7. I think that would be perfect. I mentioned to you guys on the podcast before. Yeah. Will Smith to Philly, perfect. But yeah, number 5 to Montreal. What do you think?
2.24 points per game at the U.S. National Development Team is Jack Hughes. That's his stats. 2.11 is William Smith. And let's point out this World Junior Championship U18 points, 9 goals and 20 points in 7 games. Yeah, this guy can put the puck in the net and contribute on offense. So highly skilled centerman that I had fairly high in this draft.
Yeah, and going back to my tiers, I mentioned the first tier was franchise player, second tier elite player, and that included Michkov, Fantilli, and Carlson. Tier 3 for me, and this is a tier of 1 player and 1 player only. It's Will Smith, because I think after this it opens wide up, and then it moves on to players who could be a potential star player, first to second line player. But I think Will Smith projects to be a first line player and perhaps an NHL All-Star at some point. But yeah, those are just, in my mind, those are the tiers, and I think Will Smith is a clear pick at number 5.
Yeah, and that third tier too, I would even I would even throw Ryan Leonard in there as well, who's an excellent player. But Will Smith, elite playmaker, goal scorer, and point producer. Like him to San Jose at 4. He's a Massachusetts guy, and Mike Greer and David Quinn, San Jose have big connections to Boston and all of that, so that would make a lot of sense. But I mean, you would love to think of the idea of having him and Suzuki as your 1-2 punch in Montreal. Plus, the Canadians love going back to the U.S. National Development Program to draft. I mean, look at the success that they've had. Guys like Cole Caulfield, and how good does that Lane Hudson look as well? What a steal in that second round, and he looked absolutely dynamite for the U.S. at the World. So I think it's either Smith or Leonard, and if Montreal is able to get Smith at 5, that's fantastic. Kent Hughes is going to be very happy.
Okay, number 6 pick, You're up, Harp.
All right.
Who's Arizona going to take?
All right, it goes back to me. So this may be a big swing, but I really feel that this pick would fill an organizational need. And so I've got Arizona taking the first defenseman off the board. David Reinbacher goes to the Coyotes at 6, right shot defenseman. He's got size, which we know Bo Armstrong likes a lot. He likes big defensemen, and he's got some skill as well. And again, I just think that he fits that organizational need. Maverick Lamoureux is going to, obviously take a while to come along. You've got Victor Soderstrom, who's still developing. Mosier, who has really turned into a nice defenseman for them already, and they were able to claim Juuso Välimäki off waivers. But other than that, they don't really have much else, and they don't really have a lot of depth at that position. And so I just think with Reinbacher's size, he's been able to shoot up the rankings all year long. He's been one of those guys playing with men in Austria as well, in the Swiss League with the Clotten Flyers. He's from Austria. I think that Reinbacher to Arizona makes a lot of sense. What do you guys think?
I think personally that this might be the first reach of the draft, in my opinion. I think it's a little too early to go solely based off organizational fill here, and I think that this is too early for a defenseman in this draft, as there is a boatload of highly skilled forwards available. I do like David Reinbacher as a very what is a top 2 defenseman in this draft. He's got a lot of size and can play physical, and is pretty decent at actually moving the puck, on top of being a more physical guy compared to a Simashev, for example, in this draft. So if Arizona is hell-bent on picking a defenseman, then Reinbacher is the right choice here for them. But I am kind of shocked that Harper did not pick a highly skilled forward that has a massive connection with the Arizona Coyotes in Zach Benson, who played with Geekie all year and showed some great chemistry, as that was their first round pick last year. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and deem Harper the first reacher of the draft.
Well, I think it makes a ton of sense for Arizona, first of all, to reach, and also to take a defenseman, because they have done that as recent as last draft. But let's not forget, Arizona also has the 12th pick, too.
Exactly.
And if we're talking about Zach Benson, that connection, I already mentioned, after that number 5 pick, to me, at least, it's completely wide open, including a guy like Ryan Leonard. I don't think there's any solidified number 6. So if they're looking at it and thinking, okay, how different is the forward we're going to get at 6 versus the forward we're going to get at 12, if we can also get a defenseman? Do you know what I'm saying? If you can get both,
absolutely,
and get the best defenseman, odds are Reinbacher's going to be taken before 12, right? We can kind of see that happening if Arizona doesn't take him. So if that's the case, and they're stuck with 2 forwards, that's not going to be a great draft if you have 2 picks in the top 12.
I think that they have a great chance at 12 at picking a defenseman to fill that need, and there's multiple unbelievable forwards in this draft that I think they need to go with this high at 6.
I do. Sorry, Chad. Case. I do love the connection between Benson and Geekie, obviously playing for the Winnipeg Ice together, and I do think that that's a real possibility. And look, what if we see a scenario where Arizona goes back-to-back, picking at 6 and 7? They could trade that 12th pick up to 7, and they could take Reinbacher and Benson. But at the end of the day, I do believe that with one of those picks, 6 and 12, they need to pick a defenseman with one of those picks, in my opinion.
I also agree that they probably need to. It's a bit tough that this draft is very forward heavy. The defensemen that are projected to go in the first round aren't necessarily extremely appealing to a team who wants to draft a cornerstone D. Look, Reinbacher's good. Corey Pronman's comparable for Reinbacher is Brett Pesce, and I couldn't agree more. He's a guy who projects to be a good top 4 defenseman who moves the puck well, is rangy, can kind of do it all, but isn't necessarily going to do it flashy, and he's not going to put up a ton of points. He's one of those guys. It's a bit of a safe pick, and that's why we're saying it's a reach, because there are other players whose ceilings are clearly projected to be much higher than Reinbacher. But again, this draft, we are picking players for these teams based on what we think the team is going to do. And I could definitely see Arizona making the first big reach at number 6 and picking Reinbacher, and then kind of doubling back to that connection and taking Benson at number 12.
I don't think Benson makes it to 12. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'm with you, Case. Absolutely. I don't think either player makes it to 12, in my opinion. But we'll see.
Okay, so is it me at number 7?
Yes.
No.
Or no.
No. Oh, it's Harper again.
Oh, it's me. Oh,
it's
okay.
Harper again at number 7.
Yes.
For the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yes,
Thanks,
you.
Case. Forgot we were doing a snake draft.
Thanks,
It's not
Case.
hard.
All right. So speaking of Zach Benson, I've got him going, with the very next pick to the Philadelphia Flyers, and again, maybe Arizona gets 6 and 7. There's the big connection there that with him and Connor Geekie, like you mentioned, Case. But Zach Benson to Philadelphia, elite offensive talent, and doesn't cheat the game either. Plays honestly, plays hard, and just reading his scouting reports online, a player like Zach Benson, who's a little smaller, but he's got great work ethic and elite talent. He'd be a dream for John Tortorella in Philadelphia as they really dive into this rebuild under the Daniel Briere regime. So if they can pick up Zach Benson again, if Arizona decides to go a different direction, and it's not a guarantee, but it would be cool to see him go there as well. I think if you're Philly, how could you pass up on a guy as talented as that?
No, I thought this is funny that this is the team that I thought could reach and get a defenseman too early right away. But I do also like Zach Benson going to Philadelphia, and that they kind of will have a yin and yang situation with Cutter Gauthier in the coming years, and that they have the big guy, going in the corners, playing the hard-nosed game, and also putting the puck in the net. And then one of the best skaters in this draft, in Zach Benson, who is just a kind of an offensive weapon who might get only dropping to 7 because he doesn't have 2 inches taller, and the GMs are crazy nowadays, or still, in the NHL. So I do like the pick at 7 because I think he's an uberly talented player.
Yeah, I had Zach Benson topping my 4th tier at number 6 overall in terms of best players in the draft. But the reason I mentioned that I could see him falling even to 12 is because, like you mentioned, Case, his size. He's only 5'9". It's hard to see smaller players getting picked by teams who are known for being bullies. You mentioned John Tortorella. That would be his dream to have Zach Benson. Are you kidding me, dude? He wants 18 more Cutter Gauthiers going forward. So that's why I could see, one of the other U.S. development program guys going there, because they're at least around 6 foot, like a guy like Ryan Leonard. But I don't know. I could see this pick happening. I do think he's a really good player. Like I said, I have him ranked 6 on my list. But if we're talking, tendencies for these teams and GMs, I just don't know if I see the fit in Philly. But I guess that's why we do a mock draft, because we'll see on draft day. Maybe they do come to their senses and think, okay, this guy is so talented. I know he's small, but we have to pick him. Case mentioned his skating. He's a guy who loves to play on those edges. He's very creative and crafty. Obviously puts up a ton of points. To me, that sounds a lot like Mitch Marner. And I know I've made 2 Maple Leaf connections here, 2 Maple Leaf comparables. But to me, everything I've read about Zach Benson reminds me of Mitch Marner, but a little bit smaller. And that's going to be a good player in the NHL, for sure.
And I know I mentioned John Tortorella and, liking this player, and maybe that's a bit of a stretch with the way Tortsy is, but also he's got to listen to his general manager, and I could see Daniel Briere really liking Zach Benson quite a bit. That
is true. Danny Briere at the helm now, maybe he turns the Flyers in a different direction. So I could definitely see that. Okay, now it's back to me for number 8. We figured out how this snake draft works, and we're just over halfway done here. Number 8, the Washington Capitals. I have taking Dalibor Dvorsky. Okay, 6'1", very talented. This is a player who, earlier in the season we thought could even go as high as number 4 or 5. Has been slipping on a lot of people's draft boards, but you know what? For such a talented player, I just think it makes total sense for Washington, who, again, they're just very, at the very start of their rebuild. And if they have to wait for this player, if he is a bit of a project, maybe they're okay with waiting a couple years because that ceiling is so high. So that's why I have Washington taking at number 8, Dvorsky. Case, what are your thoughts?
I have him as the 8th best player in the draft, and if I had Washington, I was going to take him at this pick. So this makes a ton of sense. Very similar in my mind to the situation with San Jose, with Michkov being able to pick a guy that is a little bit of a project. And I think that this guy's ceiling is very high. He's a player that excels on the power play and in the Ovechkin spot on the opposite wing as Ovechkin. So he's got good size, just a ridiculous release, and his compete is what really stood out to me as another one of those kind of pesky Slovaks in the World Juniors. So I love this pick.
I think that myself and so many out there would love to see Matvei Michkov go to Washington, just with the Russian connection with Ovi and everything. If there's anyone that could help get Michkov over to North America earlier, it would be Ovechkin and the Capitals. But Dvorsky would be a great pick at number 8 for the Capitals. And looking at some scouting reports on the Slovak forward, used in all situations, can battle and drive play. And also, Chad, you mentioned, beginning of a rebuild for the Capitals. It's more of a retool, I would say. Sure. So they can take this kid and he can just marinate in the American Hockey League and overseas for as long as they want. And, they've got a pretty good American Hockey League system in Hershey, who's going for another Calder Cup with a lot of good young players down there, while they continue to try and spend money, which they will this offseason, and continue to try and be competitive and go on another cup run. Taking a guy like Dvorsky would be a great pick. He's a great player, and he can marinate and develop for as long as they need him to.
And it makes a lot of sense, too, because Dvorsky is one of the younger players in the draft, period. So if you think the talent is there and the ceiling is there, but he's not quite reaching that yet because he's younger and playing against some older players, then take the pick, take the kid, and like you said, just let him marinate and start off your retool in a couple years when he's able to enter the NHL on a great note. All right, case number 9 to you, 9 and 10.
I'm having a hard time with this one. I was looking ahead in the draft and realizing that I have to draft for Detroit, and I am not Stevie Y. There's a lot of, stereotypes going on in the Detroit Red Wings draft history. So I'm trying to not do this, but I'm going to go ahead and take Axel Sandin-Pellikka as the 9th overall pick for the Detroit Red Wings. I think that he's going to be that last piece on the D-core for them that's really going to fill out this team in the future. He's a pure offensive defenseman who just joins in on the rush and basically plays Dwinger. They have Edvinsson, who's the big man, and same as Moritz, who can play both roles really. So this is another young Swedish defenseman that is going to fit in really well with that core and really really fill out the defense in the future. So I like this for them. And he's another guy that he's playing in the SHL right now. He isn't ridiculously far from being able to make the jump to the NHL. So Detroit's in that position similar to maybe a Columbus where they want to start competing soon. So they're going to need some entry-level contracts on their team. Maybe this is a guy for them in 2 years. So that's why I'm going with him now, kind of a more ready now player that fills a need as well as just fits the stereotype, I guess.
Yeah, I like Pellikka. I like the pick for Stevie Y and Detroit. I think you're right. It fills out the defense core there. In terms of NHL ready, like Pellikka's pretty close. I would say he might be number 2 among defensemen in terms of guys who are NHL ready. I think Reinbacher could potentially play in the NHL next year if a team wanted him to. More than likely, though, plays in the American League or somewhere else. And with Sandin Pellikka, he's played in SHL games this season and dominated the Swedish Junior League. So I don't see any reason why you would pry him out of there. Just let him bake there for one more season, maybe 2, and just dominate and then come over to North America. We've seen that Detroit is okay with waiting. They waited on Moritz. Yeah. So I could see it happening again, and maybe there could be a connection with Edvinsson, because he's a Swedish guy too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Sounds very Swedish, so that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. I have them, waiting on him for 1 or 2 years, and like I said, that's going to be the time when they really start competing. So it's going to be great to have an entry-level contract defenseman on your team and a guy who can lead your power play at that point as well. So yeah, I'm happy to get him here.
Yeah, Case, Axel Sandin Pellikka, this is the exact player that I had going to the Detroit Red Wings at this number 9 pick. Two-way defender, good skater, and a QB on the power play. You'd have the 3-headed monster for years to come in Seider, Edvinsson, and the other Swede in Sandin Pellikka. And I think that Detroit needs another defenseman, another top defensive prospect in their organization. They don't have a ton once you get by those 3 guys. They've got some veterans in Ben Sherratt and Oli Mata who are okay. Jake Wallman was a nice surprise for them last year. He's in his late 20s, but they kind of had to overpay him. It seems like they really need to go with a defenseman here to shore up that back end for the future. So I like Sandin Pellikka to Detroit with this pick too. Case, right back to you. Number 10, St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, I'm going to take a guy that I just personally am pretty high on. I think he makes sense for St. Louis. There's some scouts that don't like him because of his foot speed, but I think he's got enough of other positives that you can kind of try to work on the speed or even live without it. And this is still a great player to have at number 10. And like I said, fits St. Louis's system. And that's Matthew Wood, who was the youngest player in the NCAA last year. And just so happened to be at just under a point per game. I think he turned 18 in February. So that's just impressive in itself. He's got a ton of upside and a great shot. So he's a bigger player that may lack some foot size, but I think we've seen that before in St. Louis, and they're another team that, they don't really need to pick the ready now player, and it just makes sense for me to have a guy to kind of work on because they're in a retooling situation in St. Louis. So Matthew Wood is going 10 overall to St. Louis.
That makes sense to me. Matthew Wood, 6'4", youngest player in college hockey this year, and put up some incredible numbers. 1 year removed from leading the BCHL in goals and points. So even though he's a big guy and has that, high compete, he can also put the puck in the net and projects to be a pretty good top 6 forward if he hits. Now you're right, Case. He's a bit more of a project than some of the other players on this list. Even guys in the United States Development Program, talking about guys like Ryan Leonard, who I know you like, and Gabe Perreault, and guys like that, Oliver Moore as well. But I just think that pick makes a lot of sense for St. Louis because you're right. Like, they already kind of have some young weapons who can score. Why not add another one with some size and try to figure it out? And if he doesn't hit in the top 6, well, then you've got a good middle 6 player who can bring something different in St. Louis, who again is kind of going through this rebuild, retool as we speak. So I like the pick, Case. It might be a bit of a reach. I think there are some other good players on the board, but again, we're talking team fit here, and for St. Louis, I can see it.
No, I admit that this is maybe a reach based off where I have him as a player on his own. But since I landed with St. Louis and a team that's in a retool situation, I just thought that the project makes sense here. And man, this guy had a pretty phenomenal U18 World Junior Championship as well, scoring 7 goals and 6 assists, playing on the top line for 7 games, and it was pretty spectacular. So a long project here for St. Louis. Harp.
I'm fascinated by this player, and I've got a really good note on this kid. He, obviously big power forward, that 6'4" frame that he's going to take a while to grow into. Plays for UConn, where guess who? Tage Thompson played as well. And who originally drafted Tage Thompson? The St. Louis Blues. Oh, and guess who Matthew Wood looks up to as a player and tries to model his game around? Tage Thompson. So this makes a ton of sense. Matthew Wood going to the St. Louis Blues at number 10.
So much sense. And also I will note as well, just as we wrap up on Matthew Wood, what exactly I was I just going to say? That's got it. Now that we're wrapping up on Matthew Wood, I wanted to say this is a player who's fallen a bit over the last year or so. Case, you mentioned some of the scouts don't like his foot speed or lack thereof. But, there was a reason he was projected to be a top 10 pick as early as about a year ago. It's because he has a lot of the tools, and he's been able to seemingly put them together on the score sheet. But there's just something there about the foot speed and about growing into that frame that is scaring some people away. So I think at 10, it's not that big of a reach. I have him as 15 ranked on my list. But I like it for St. Louis a lot.
I had him at 13, and it makes a ton of sense for St. Louis just with some of the past connections there for sure.
Definitely. That was cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so for number 11, there are a few really good players still on the board here. Harper, you mentioned one of them. That's who I'm going to take, and I'm going to take Ryan Leonard of the United States Development Program, going to the Vancouver Canucks. Vancouver, I feel like in the past has taken a bunch of wingers, and I'm thinking of guys like, I guess Pettersson, is their only center, but point is, I think they need another center to add to that. So I think that's what makes sense, taking a guy from the National Development Program. And I think there's 2 good options. Ryan Leonard is one, Gabe Perreault is another. They both play on the wing on that top line with Smith, but can also both slot in down the middle. So Ryan Leonard, I think, is the better player. Just reading from Corey Proman's scouting report, a bit of an average skater and hockey sense, but very much above average puck skills and shot. And also high-end compete. Very versatile player, like I already mentioned, with that position flexibility there, and can play up and down the lineup and projects to be a pretty good player, whether it's in the middle 6 or finds a spot in the top 6. So I think Vancouver needs more of those players who, don't just give you that Russian flash of Podkolzin. And I think you need to add to that team, because that's another team, again, who we don't really know exactly what they're doing, but they're in a period of flux, I would say. So I think Ryan Leonard to Vancouver could make some sense.
Case?
Yeah, I had him as the 7th ranked player on my draft board here, but kind of let him slip based off, what teams I was drafting with. This guy, you watch his highlight pack, and he just seems to be in the right place at the right time all the time, and that's how you score at the pro level. And you also do it with a great release and great hands, and that's what he possesses. So I think they'd be pretty damn happy to get him this late in the draft.
Yeah, I don't personally. I don't see Ryan Leonard falling this far to number 11. But I mean, it certainly still a high pick in the first round, and Vancouver, I think, would be absolutely thrilled to get a player like Ryan Leonard, projected as a top line NHL forward, used in all situations, and character apparently is a really big thing with this guy. I heard in a couple of interviews from multiple people who were at the NHL Combine that he crushed his pre-draft interviews, and so character is a big thing. We know that it's a big thing with Vancouver's head coach Rick Tocchet. I think that Leonard is one of those guys who we could see in the NHL in a couple of years. I don't think it'll take him long to make that jump, and we know that Vancouver wants to stay competitive, or wants to be competitive again and be a playoff team as soon as next season. So Leonard would be a great pick for the Vancouver Canucks at 11.
Okay, so on to you for number 12.
All right, so I guess, would it be me for 12 and 13?
That's right.
Okay, perfect.
That worked out pretty nicely then for 13.
Yeah, sure did. Although I do have to pivot on that one, but I'll get to that in a second. So back to the Arizona Coyotes for 12. So I get both Arizona picks. How funny is that? but anyway, with the 12th pick, and this may be a bit of a reach, but again, I really like the fit for the Coyotes and just what Bill Armstrong likes as a GM. But I've got the Russian winger Daniil Butte going 12th overall to Arizona. He's got top 6 forward potential. Again, like we were talking about with Matthew Wood, he's got time to grow into that big frame, and he's a little bit taller at 6'5", but he's got a great work ethic, very versatile forward, and again has that top 6 forward potential. And I'll say it again, boys, we know that Bill Armstrong loves size in his lineup, both with his forwards and on defense. So maybe a bit of a reach, maybe a little high for a guy like Daniil Butte, but man, oh man, Bill Armstrong just puts so much value on size in players, and I think that he'd be a great fit in Arizona, and a guy that would be a project, but could end up being a good player for them.
Yeah, I mean, I have him as my 25th ranked player in the draft, so it might be a reach based off skill level, but if he does have the frame, he fits the mentality of Arizona's scouting and drafting in the past. So I wouldn't be terribly surprised if they went ahead and picked him. And if they go against Harper's words and pick Zach Benson at the 6th spot there, then that would be a nice little 1-2 punch with him and Butte, because you got the size and you got the small skilled guy.
Yeah, I think if they don't pick a defenseman at 6, though, they would probably be looking for one at 12. But it just depends on who's on the board, because at 12, if you're not picking, like if Simashev is gone, who might go 2nd or 3rd among defensemen, then it's kind of up in the air. Like Tom Wallander maybe, but anyways, at number 12, Butte, I think that's a decent pick, and I could see Arizona making that pick. They love guys with size, like you've mentioned.
Yeah.
And this isn't just some random power forward. Like, this guy has put up some pretty good numbers over in Russia in the MHL, and has played some games in the KHL as well. So I've heard some scouts say that, or I've read that some scouts have said that he's one of actually the more talented players in the draft, but teams have been, kind of like, scouts have heard through the grapevine that teams have been a little bit scared that he's a Russian player and they're not exactly sure when they're going to get him. So that's always going to be a concern, I guess, going forward with Russian players. So that's something to consider as well. Maybe he drops further than that, or maybe Arizona says, look, like, we can wait on this guy. It doesn't matter if we get him in 3 years. If he's the player we want, he's the player we're going to take. So
On my board, I have him, like I said, at 25. But if there's any player that's going to shoot up in the draft and be picked, earlier than expected as maybe a reach, it's going to be this guy because of his size and the way he plays the game. So I wouldn't be surprised if he went, way earlier than where I projected, and maybe as early as 12 or 13.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So 13 for Buffalo. So I got to say, you guys will laugh at this, but I originally had them taking Matthew Wood in this spot, who we just talked about there a few minutes ago. But I'll go with someone who would fill an organizational need for them, and that's on defense. So I've got Tom Willander going to the Sabres at 13 then. So a little pivot there. I mean, another Swedish defenseman. Worked out pretty well for them when they selected Rasmus Dahlin first overall in 2018. You look at Willander, elite skater, two-way defender. I mean, how cool would it be to see him and Owen Power playing together, and then you have Samuelsson and Dahlin a little bit down the road. So I think that he could be the third defenseman to go in this draft. Potentially, it might be Simashev out of Russia. He's definitely got the size advantage at 6'4".
Right, but he has the Russian factor too, which you have to consider.
Yes, exactly. And Willander is talented, and he's a name that you kind of see all over the place in this draft. He could either go really high and surprise some people, or he could be really low in the first round. But I could see Willander being a fit for the Sabres and give them some depth on the blue line, which they could use.
Definitely.
I personally, I like the pick here for Buffalo as an organizational fill. I have him as the fourth. It's complicated. I have him as the fourth best defenseman in the draft, but I have him going third in the draft because Simashev is one of those guys who will drop and be picked up late in the first round pick. I think that he's got poor offensive skills. The size is intriguing, and the way he plays as a defensive defenseman is intriguing, but I don't think he's going to get picked in the first half of this draft. So I think that Willander is the second best offensive defenseman after the other Swedish defenseman, Pellikka. So this one makes sense, and he's actually got better size than Pellikka. So it kind of, really fills that need for Buffalo. I like it.
Yeah, I do like the player. And previously when I said, it's kind of wide open among defensemen, it wasn't a knock on Willander. I think he is a good defenseman, projects to be, that is, moves the puck pretty well. And also, too, interesting enough, is going to BU next year, is committed to play at BU. So some GMs like having a guy who is quote unquote controlled, or at least in North America. So that's something to think about as well. And I could definitely see that happening in Buffalo. And speaking of Swedish defensemen, whichever one they get, Willander or Sandin Pellikka, or any other Swedish player for that matter, who better to learn from on the back end as a Swedish defenseman than Rasmus Sandin? So Dahlin, rather. Sorry, Sandin Pellikka is in my head, but Dahlin, who better to learn from? So that makes a ton of sense for me, for sure. Okay, so number 14, back to me.
The Pittsburgh Penguins.
Pittsburgh Penguins at number 14. And this is why I've been looking down at my phone, half paying attention. Sorry, Harp, for the last 5 minutes.
No,
because
that's okay.
I was looking up who's picking at 14. I've got that. And I'll say this. If Pittsburgh still has this pick at the draft, I will be absolutely shocked. Because Kyle Dubas and company are trying to retool this team as quickly as possible so they can win another cup with this core. So if they still have this pick, number 14, by the time draft day rolls around, I will be absolutely shocked. But if they do, I could see Kyle Dubas going off the board if he were allowed to participate. So humor me for a sec. He cannot participate in the draft, Kyle Dubas, that is. That's not to say that he won't be communicating with his drafting staff, but for a lot of reasons that the NHL, has laid out as a rule, he cannot participate in the draft. If Kyle Dubas was participating in the draft, I would have him taking Jaden Perron. Jaden Perron is a player who played in the USHL this year, and it would be a bit of a reach, by the way, to take Jaden Perron because he's an undersized player and there are some other good players available at this pick. But in 61 games, he has 72 points in the USHL, and he played for the Chicago Steel, which Kyle Dubas loves. He loves his players from the Chicago Steel, so I think it would make a ton of sense. However, like I mentioned, he cannot draft for the Penguins this year. Plus, I don't think they'll even have the pick. So, unfortunately, I don't think Jaden Perron will be going to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Instead, there are a bunch of names here, and I wasn't exactly sure who to pick for Pittsburgh for this reason.
I wasn't either.
Because like I've mentioned, I don't think they'll have the pick, and also, if they do make the pick, like, they kind of have to start from scratch, right? Like, they don't really have any guys coming. They kind of need in all areas. So yeah, all of that being said, I think I might just take one of the next best players off the board, and that would be Brandon Yager. It's likely that Yager moves to the wing in the NHL. He's currently playing in the WHL as a centerman, but because of the size thing, because he's under 6 feet tall, and because of the average, I would say, skating, it's likely he moves to the wing in the NHL. But in the WHL this year, he's been a pretty good player, above average compete, says Corey Pronman. He has that high-end shot, and he plays really hard, goes to the net, not afraid. Being compared to a guy like Travis Konechny, and I think if you're building your team from scratch, like, if Pittsburgh decides to make this pick, they kind of will be, then I think he could be a good player to fit. High ceiling, has scored a ton, plus he brings a bit of that edge too, so I think Yager would make sense for the Pens. Thoughts?
Yeah, Chad going way off the board, picking Brandon Yager, Braden Yager's brother.
Oh my God.
Actually not available in this draft.
Stop.
It's actually just an unprecedented move here by the Pittsburgh Penguins. And wow, they wish Kyle Dubas maybe had some say in this, because that was dumb.
Sorry.
But
Case.
if they were to pick Braden Yager, that would be a great pick to have this late in the draft. There's no way that this guy should fall this late, but it's just been the story of the NHL draft, and they hate undersized forwards, although he's one of the bigger undersized forwards, whatever that means. But a very strong two-way game and high compete, so it's a can't-miss player in my mind.
Harp, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't really have a ton more on Braden Yager. He definitely he really could go anywhere in this first round. I think all the talent in the world is there, and it's a shame that there will be a lot of general managers that will look at his size and kind of turn a blind eye to a player like that. I look at all the teams that turned down Lane Hudson in the draft last year, albeit a defenseman, but still a smaller player. But Yager's got all the tools, has played unbelievably well for Moose Jaw in the Western Hockey League, and it'd be a great pick for Pittsburgh, and I agree, I'd be shocked if they have 2 first-rounders 2 years in a row, because they picked Owen Pickering with their first-rounder last year, which was in the 20s. So, but looking at Pittsburgh, they could use another first-rounder and try to build up that prospect pool a little bit. So that's going to be one of many tasks for Kyle Dubas.
For sure.
Well, I personally am feeling really lucky that I've got the player I wanted right from the start. When you guys told me when I was picking, I looked down, I saw I was picking for Nashville as the last pick in our little mock draft here, and I put Nashville beside the name of Gabriel Perreault. I thought this is a perfect fit. I was not thinking he would slip this far in the draft to 15. I actually had him as the 13th best player in the draft, but I thought he could even have gone higher because I've seen him all over this board. But 132 points. That is what he had on the national development team this year, which puts him up in the same category as Matthews, Jack Hughes, and Clayton Keller as the highest scoring players to ever play on that team. This guy is an offensive weapon, and Nashville is going to love pairing him up with Kemmel in the future, who they picked in the first round with one of the biggest steals in the draft last year, as we talked about many times after that draft. So they got the sniper in Kemmel, and now they've got the playmaker and kind of all around offensive weapon in Perreault. So this is going to be a great pick for Nashville.
Yeah, like we mentioned earlier, Perreault plays on that top line for the United States Development Program and smashing records. He broke Austin Matthews' single season point record this year, so that's pretty crazy in and of itself. But Perreault makes a lot of sense in Nashville. They're another team who, they need to kind of just restart. They have a few guys coming. They've been doing it for the past couple of years. Kemmel, like you mentioned, Case is one. But they kind of just need that high-end talent, and they need to see who hits. Gabe Perreault is a guy who I think definitely will hit. So that makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a big draft for Nashville. There's no question about it. They've got quite a few picks in this draft, I believe, and it's the first draft for Barry Trotz as the new general manager of the Predators, and we all saw the quote on social media that he wants his scouts to take some big swings, and I don't really know if this is a big swing because of all the records that Gabe Perreault has smashed with the U.S. development program and just the elite offensive talent that he is, and Nashville could really use a player like this and add to that young pool of players they've got coming in, because I do think that Nashville has done a good job. They've got guys like Tomasino and Evangelista that are coming along nicely. Kemmel is going to be there before we know it. So adding a guy like Gabriel Perreault, in the middle of the first round, I think would be fantastic for the Predators.
Yeah, they've just been lacking scoring in the last 10 years. We've harped on this so much.
Yeah. And
so take your swing at a guy who can score a lot of points and finally fill that need for you guys. Talk about hockey family with this guy as well. Yannick Perreault, who played for Toronto, played many seasons in the NHL, Toronto, Montreal, and one season with the Nashville Predators. So there's your connection, Harper Cody. And Jacob Perreault, who's currently in the Anaheim Ducks system, is his brother. So an NHL family, a guy in the National Development Program who's breaking records, number 15th, or the 15th pick. That's, I think, you don't have to take a huge swing if you're Nashville, if this guy's available.
Yeah, and there are a lot of good players still available at that number 15 spot. This pick makes sense, but there are definitely some other scorers available. And then Nashville also has the number 24 pick as well, which I think it would make sense if I'm Nashville. You take your scorer at 15, and then you maybe try to get a defenseman at 24, and you kind of round out your draft with those two guys. At least start off on the right foot there. And I guess it depends who's available on D at 24. If Simashev's there, take him. Maybe Bonk if he's there. So it kind of all just depends. But what I wanted to mention as well, as we've now finished our top 15 mock draft, is that there are some damn good players left on the board. So I just wanted to read a few that we didn't pick. Case just picked Gabe Perreault, so he's off. But another guy from the U.S. Development Program is Oliver Moore. Did not get picked in our top 15. Nate Danielson did not get picked in our top 15. Those are two pretty good players. Dmitry Simashev defensemen out of Russia in the KHL and the MHL did not get picked. And then Colby Barlow is a player who's been rising over the last couple months. Did not get picked. Samuel Honzik, Andrew Crystal, and the list goes on. Those are a few players who definitely could go top 15. At least that's who I'm guessing could go in the top 15. Maybe there are a few other sleeper names out there who could. But those players did not get picked in our top 15. And there's still some pretty good names left.
Yeah.
Two guys that I'm just going to say as I keep an eye on. One of them you've heard me talk about a lot already, and that's Edard Chalet. I still think that this could be a great player and an off-the-board pick. Talk about making a swing. Maybe Nashville goes for this guy. He's just kind of a sneaky, high IQ, excellent passing player who's got a decent frame that you can fill out in the weight room, and I think that he's going to catch some people off guard. Another one that has been rising on a lot of people's draft boards is Mikhail Gilyaev, who is an offensive defenseman who's just an excellent skater. Maybe lacks some size on the back end, but he's been putting up some crazy numbers in the MHL lately, and he's even been able to play 13 games in the KHL and 12 games in the VHL as a young, undersized defenseman in the KHL. Not something you see very often.
Yeah. Doing a bit of research for this episode, it just made me realize how kind of ruthless they are in Russia when it comes to just kind of bouncing players around. Like, so many guys have games played in one season in the KHL, the VHL, and the MHL. It's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, some good players left for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Two guys that I'm kind of interested in that we'll see late in the first round. Quentin Musty of the Sudbury Wolves, a big forward from Hamburg, New York, and maybe he's a guy that could end up with the Sabres, has got a connection to them. And then Charlie Stramel, who we've talked about before as well. We saw him a little bit playing in a limited role as a 17-year-old with the U.S. World Junior team in the new year. I really wonder where he gets selected as well, because he's a big body at 6'3", and they both are, and I just wonder where they land later on in the first round.
I'm going to be watching for him as well, because I thought he was a pretty high-ranked prospect, and doing my research, I see that Pronman has him at 23, Wheeler has him at 37, Dauber has him at 50, and he's unranked by elite prospects.
Yeah.
So
That's
pretty
wild.
crazy how far he's dropped off on the board. He's in a very late first-round pick for me. I had him at 27, so it's going to be interesting.
27, is that when the Leafs pick, Case? When exactly?
Yeah.
When exactly did the Leafs pick?
Colorado.
28, I think maybe Toronto's pick is. But
yes.
I could see him in blue and white. He would make a lot of sense. Another U.S. guy to play with Austin, maybe convince him to stay. And plus, I have talked about him in the past. I do like that player a lot. And as a late first, I think that can make a ton of sense.
Definitely. It's a deep draft. There's no question about it. And the first round starts a week from Wednesday. So this episode is out on Wednesday, and the draft is next week. Wednesday, June 28th, starting at 7 o'clock. We'll see Connor Bedard get drafted number 1 to the Chicago Blackhawks, and so on and so forth. It's going to be a lot of fun as we are officially in the off season. So thanks for being with us for this episode, as we did it a little bit differently for our draft preview show that we do every year. That was a lot of fun. Looking forward to the Boys in the Booth Ball Hockey Classic this weekend. Again, for more information on that, you can go to boysinthebooth.com, and we will chat with you again soon. Take care.
This has been another episode of Boys in the Booth with Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. Connect with the Boys in the Booth on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Boys in the Booth. Visit boysinthebooth.com for show details. And don't forget, you can become a patron of the podcast for just $1 a month at patreon.com/boysinthebooth.